إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى وصحبه وسلم. Questions? Question 1. Suwaid ibn as-Samit, what was his nickname? Either in English or in Arabic. Suwaid ibn as-Samit. Okay. Question 2. What's the name of the two tribes that constitute the Arabs of Medina, of Yathrib? Shukran, thanks so much. Question 3. How many people made the oath of allegiance, the first oath of allegiance, which is called Bayatun Nisa? And I want to know how many people became Muslim the first time round. I want to know how many people were at the Bayatun Nisa. The first bayah, the one that we stopped talking, when we finished, we mentioned they made an oath of allegiance and la yushrik billah, that they wouldn't. So basically to become Muslim. So they didn't ask, the Prophet ﷺ didn't demand anything of them. How many questions is that? 3. The fourth question, what was the name of the person that I said we were going to talk about when we come back? Because he was the one that was sent with them. And if you don't get that, that's not such a big problem, because I'm not sure if I didn't emphasize it. I was just moving about and said his name. And question 5 is, give me a question about the lesson that I'm going to ask the other side of the room. So you write down a question, which is question 5, which is going to go to the ladies or to go to the men. And I'll give you a couple of minutes in case you want to cheat and consult your neighbour, which is a good idea. Right. Answer the first question. The perfect, Mr. Perfect, Al-Kamil. Second question. Aus and Khazraj. Good. Third question. Sorry? 12. Good. I have to think for a second there. 12. And fourth question. Mus'ab ibn Umair. And if you went to Uhud, that's where he's buried. And the fifth question is, yeah, what's your fifth question?
So you hear a lot about Ali and Abu Bakr and Umar and stuff. How come we don't hear about a lot of Jafar, Ali's brother?
Okay, that's for you. Why do you hear, we hear so much about Sayyidina Ali, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, but we don't hear a great deal about Ja'far? That's a difficult question, isn't it? Do you know who they're talking about? Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, yeah? Why don't we hear such a great deal about Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib? It's a very clever question, actually. And it's not irrelevant to what was said yesterday. Sorry? Sorry? He went to Africa. He spent most of his life off the scene, so to speak. So it's interesting because when the people came from MadIna, from Ethiopia, which was almost 15 years after they left, most of them had not made salah. Why? because the Salah was revealed in MadIna. And so the laws of Islam were not known to them, because when they left for Africa, the rules, there weren't any rules. It was just basically identifying Allah, believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And most of them had not established anything in terms of the Shariahs. And so many of them, when they arrived in Medina many years later, had almost had to catch up with 15 years of Seerah, of Quran and things. So it's a really good question. Is it an acceptable answer? Good.
Just name a few things that was said in the dua.
Okay. Anything that was said in the Dua of Ta'if? Anything that you can remember from the Dua of Ta'if? Oh Allah, I complain to you of the weakness of my and incapacity. It's good. Ladies, have you got a question for the guys? You don't? No problem. Okay, so Mus'ab ibn Umair. Mus'ab ibn Umair is important because his story is quite... Yeah, anyway, I'll just tell the story. He had very, very rich parents. He was showered with gifts as a child. He had everything. He was clever. He had everything that anybody could possibly have in the dunya. He was handsome. He was intelligent, and he had a status because, you know, some people, they just adore their children and just kind of bring them everywhere. And as a result of having their children with them everywhere, those children actually grow up to have a certain kind of status because they've been in the shade of their father. And that's actually what happened with the Prophet ﷺ, as we described. He was with Abdul Muttalib and Abu Talib in all of those big gatherings. So this was what Mus'ab ibn Umair was like. When he heard about Dar al-Arqam, and that this is where they used to gather to hear the Quran, he was attracted to this. He went to Dar al-Arqam and he heard the Quran and he joined the Muslims. However, he kept it secret because of his status. Now, it wasn't because he was ashamed or because he was shy. He actually said the reason why he didn't tell anybody was because he knew his mother would be upset. He knew his mother would be upset. So he actually had an honourable reason for hiding his Islam. One of the reasons that I like the story of Mus'ab ibn Umair is because it relates so much to some people I know in different ways. And one of them is, some people do hide their Islam. And sometimes they have legitimate reasons for hiding their Islam. I remember one particular girl who was quite young when she became Muslim, and she knew what the consequences of her becoming Muslim was. She would have been thrown out of the house. So she just didn't tell anybody. And I remember her saying that the only time she can pray is in the toilet. Of course, she didn't know that you can't pray in the toilet. So she used to go and just take ages in the bathroom, 5 times a day. And nobody had suspected. And then we talked a little bit about, actually, that's not the best way to deal with this. But alhamdulillah, just the kind of challenges of being Muslim, but not being able to develop without the threats. And there's a brother, I say he's a brother because he's already, in his heart, he's been Muslim for many years. And I know he's made salah with me. But because he's actually in the public eye, he's known as one of the greatest Islamophobes in Europe. He's written extensively attacking Islam, but he's been quiet for a few years, and he's even hinted in some of his writings later that there's a possibility that he would reconsider Islam. And he was about to take Shahada. and he held back because of different reasons. And just the challenges of going through that process of becoming Muslim or taking Shahada or adopting Islam. And in women's case, it's also adopting, because the hijab has become a bigger thing than it really should be. In some ways, a woman adopting the hijab is almost as traumatic as becoming Muslim, because it's a statement of a commitment which is very, very physical, and as a result it brings on lots and lots of consequences. And this whole idea of holding back, or even when we look at Ammar ibn Yasir yesterday and actually denying, in those early days there's a lot of lessons about how we should deal with people today. For example, if somebody says, "Can I hide my Islam from my parents?" What's your answer? Your answer is, yes, you can. Would anybody say no to that? You shouldn't hide your Islam. But yeah, you need to. That's the key. Is you need to look, and when you're looking at the seerah, is to draw the lessons from that, relevant to that particular person, and make sure you get the right lesson. Because, for example, I remember somebody telling them the story of Sayyidina Abbas, and saying that many of our teachers considered that Sayyidina Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, was Muslim way, way, way before it points out in this. And if you look at his relationship with Quraysh, his relationship with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it's as if he was the Muslim among the enemy, because he was there amongst all of the leaders of Quraysh plotting against Islam. He wasn't, and often information came as a result of being connected to Sayyidina Abbas. So in many ways he kept his Islam, according to our understanding, secret, and the benefits that brought about as a result of him being in that situation were quite phenomenal. So here again, my advice to that brother was, why do you need to make it public? That was my advice. And he says, I have to, because he's a public figure. What should I tell him? Anyway, you think about it. You can advise me later. Anyway, so Sayyidina Mus'ab ibn Umair hid it, but he described the reason why was not because he just didn't want to upset his mother. But one day, one of the tribesmen, Uthman ibn Talha, saw him and reported back to his parents, and as a result of that, they then imprisoned him in his own home. They chained him to the floor, and so that he wasn't allowed to move. And he tried to escape once, and that's when they decided actually he's not safe to even. You need to chain him 24 hours a day to the ground. And he went through this difficult time where he wasn't allowed to move, basically. Alhamdulillah, shortly before the migration to Abyssinia, they'd eased up on his punishment because he'd backed off from his Islam to make it less obvious, and it looked as if his commitment to Islam was getting less, but it wasn't. And as a result, this was a strategy, because he knew when he escapes, he only has one chance. So he wanted to get that opportunity to escape. And alhamdulillah, Allah gave the opportunity for him to escape. He escaped once, and that was it. And he fled. He fled all the way to Abyssinia. But he was one of those people that came back when he heard about, as we described, the satanic verses and the salah of Quraysh behind the Prophet ﷺ. So when he came back, it was just really, really difficult for him. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, there will come a time when Allah will grant you victory over Persia and Rome, Istanbul. You will have one dress in the morning and one in the evening. So he's talking to the companions. He says, and don't forget, these are people that have got nothing. These are the poorest. He says, one day you will conquer Persia and Istanbul. And you will eat from one plate in the morning and one plate in the evening. You will wear one set of clothes in the morning and one set in the evening. And they'd like looking at in total bemusement. And Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal asks, are we better off now or are we better off then? And the Prophet ﷺ says, Ya Mus'ab, if you knew what I knew of the dunya, you would not have any concern about it. And he didn't. He had no interest in the dunya. Some years later, the Prophet ﷺ saw him in Medina and he cried. He looked at him and he cried because Mus'ab ibn Umair understood the dunya. And he looked at him and he had the skin of an animal covering his top, stuck together with a pin, and the skin of an animal stuck together with a pin on and that's all he had. That's all the clothes he had, was just an animal skin, sheepskin on the top with a stick through it, and a sheepskin on the bottom with a stick through. And when he died, when they buried him, of course he died as shaheed, so you don't put him into the coffin. He didn't have enough to cover his aura, his body wasn't covered. So they complained to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet just stretched it. Just made dua and stretched it. He says, this is Mus'ab ibn Umair. And he symbolizes the relationship with the dunya. So that Mus'ab also, so you've been to Uhud, haven't you? So we're going to talk about the story of Uhud, but probably not on this trip, maybe in the next series. But Mus'ab ibn Umair is given the responsibility of holding the standard. And of course, in the battle, there's a rumour that goes about that the Prophet ﷺ has been killed. And that throws the Muslims into panic. It was actually Mus'ab that used to say, he would shout, "Ma Muhammad illa Rasul qad khalat min ar-rusul min qabl." That this is the verse that was revealed, and he was the one that would shout this, and then the verse was revealed to confirm that the Prophet Muhammad is only a man. The Prophet is a messenger, and messengers have passed before you. In other words, it's okay. The message remains. And he was the one that stood firm, and others went into panic. And of course, he was then killed. Alhamdulillah, Mus'ab ibn Umair. So Mus'ab was then sent to, with these 12. And he was an amazing person in many ways in terms of the dawah. And just to tell maybe a couple of things related to him. There was a moment where he went and he stayed with a man called Asad ibn Zarara, and he was one of the 12, who was Khazraj. But was related to Sa'd ibn Ubadah, who was the leader of the other clan, Aus. Sorry, it's actually the other way around. But and what's important is that Mus'ab ibn Umair was very beautiful in the way that he addressed people. He had a beautiful appearance, even though he was extremely impoverished at this time. There was something which went beyond that. And his way of addressing people had that same kind of beauty in the way that when he spoke, he just smiled at people and said something. And they would just melt. And we were just talking about the likes of Habib Ahmed Mashhour. That is really what was so special about him. And if anyone, I was blessed to meet him, but if anyone's met Habib Ali, for example, that's one of the qualities that he has. He just smiles. And often he pretends he doesn't speak any English. You met Habib Ali. You know, he does, and he does speak English. I don't know how well he speaks English, but I know he understands. And it's endearing the way that he addresses people, because he'll use one or two words which would be enough. And almost not speaking English is to his advantage, because he comes over that there's something beyond language that is communicated. And this is actually the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And all of the people that have had powerful effects on me have had that quality, and that's the one quality that I've looked for in sheikhs. And when I found it, I said, that's a man I can learn from. And one of the best examples is one of my teachers, Habib Hassan, who's the imam of one of the mosques in Singapore, Masjid Ba'alawi. And I remember I was doing some things. I was living in the mosque, but I had all my jobs to do during the day in other organisations. So I was doing some stuff, and I got a call. It was very rare that I was summoned back to the mosque. And I was told, Habib said, you have to come back to the mosque because there is a group of Scottish Christians coming. So I thought, okay, Habib's ordered me back. And I knew his thinking, okay, they're Scottish, Abdulaziz is Scottish, or was from Scotland. That's what he wanted. So I came, and I got there, and you could feel the animosity of these missionaries. It's fine. I'm used to animosity. I'm used to Scottish people, no problem at all. So we started talking, and then I cracked a joke with one of these ladies. I says, you know, my wife, Sarah, she just loves the imam of this mosque. She just says, he's the cutest man I've ever met. And she just giggles. She says, he's just, and I says, when you meet him, you'll understand Islam. Because he is really, and she's like thinking, why is this guy talking about his wife thinking another guy's cute? And why would anybody describe a sheikh as cute? It's like, it's just bizarre. As you could see on this lady's face. But anyway, I talked a bit about Islam, and then Habib Hassan came. And then he greeted them all very politely. And then we went and we had some food, and then Habib Hassan stood up and says, oh, but you've all met Abdulaziz, and Abdulaziz, tell us something about Islam. And that was like, I stood up and said like 2 or 3 words and then sat down. And then we had something to eat, and they all got up to left. And this lady was like the most angry. You could see on her face. She just came and she says, tell your wife she's right. He is really cute. But the way she said it was not, he's really cute. What she meant was, he's got something special. And you could see the tone and everything about her had changed towards Islam. And it wasn't because of what I said or what I did. Because Habib didn't actually say or do anything. He just stood up and says, welcome to the mosque. Abdulaziz, say something about Islam. But the effect that he had on her was to do with who he was. And I've seen this with so many, and I mentioned Habib Ali because he's been here to the UK many a time. So when you find people like that, you know what I'm talking about with Mus'ab ibn Umair. Anyway, Mus'ab ibn Umair was sitting there, and because Asad ibn Zurara, his host, had family with the other side, he kind of could go into the other territory. So if they were living on Paisley Road West, they don't have to just limit themselves to the bit by the library. They could get down to the bottom of the road as well, because the gangs don't quite. So that's kind of where Asad ibn Zurara was. So Asad ibn Zurara would sit in this area, which was really the other side. And Sa'd ibn Ubadah says, nah, this is out of order. These people, they come onto our side of the town, and they just come and look at that man is corrupting our youth. Look, see the kind of people he attracts? They're the foolish ones. He attracts our foolish ones, those that got no intelligence. So he's talking to his sidekick, his number 2. So Sa'ad ibn Ubadah is number 1. And Usayd is number 2. So he says, I think we should go and deal with them. I think we should go sort them out. You can see the blood boiling. Yawm al-Bi'ath, the Arab, this is what we're about. But I'm not going to do it myself because he's my nephew, he's my cousin. My mum and his mum are sisters. So I think you should go and do it. Just go and threaten them. Just sort them out. It doesn't mean kill them. Just go and sort them out and stop him from corrupting our young people. So Usayd says, okay, I'll go. And he gets his, what's that? Lance, is it? Spear. So he gets his spear. It's like a, those kind of Arab spears are like swords, really. So he comes along and he says, you people, corrupting out with this nonsense that you're saying, I need to. Musab looks at him and he smiles and he says, Marhaba, welcome. Why don't you join us and listen to what I have to say? And if you like it, you accept it. And if you don't like it, reject it. This is a good way, isn't it? And Usayd says, what can you say to that? He says, oh, cool, okay. So he sits and he starts to recite some Quran. And he says, how do I become Muslim? He says, just go and take a shower and come back and we'll talk. And that whole process of what we're talking about, cleansing oneself. So he goes. And Sa'ad ibn Ubadah is looking from a distance. And he's thinking, what's going on here? So Usayd becomes Muslim. He comes back and he says, we've all got to become Muslim. This man is the man. He's come with a message that is beyond human life. This is the message that is going to unite all of us. And Sa'ad ibn Ubadah says, I've got to do it myself, haven't I? The one thing I didn't want to do was to kill and start another war with my own cousin. So he goes along and he takes the spear and he puts it there. But before he can say anything, Musab looks at him. He says, welcome. Do you want to hear what we have to say? For surely you're an intelligent man. If you listen to what I have to say and accept it, if it's good, you'll accept it. And if it's not, you'll reject it. Is that not fair? And again, he can't do anything. He puts his spear down and the same thing happens. And when Sa'ad ibn Ubadah and Asad ibn Zuraqah have both become Muslim, khalas, Islam is spread. But now, Mus'ab has never even said anything about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam at this point. So he then points out that there is a man who has received this revelation, and if you were to know him, then surely all your problems would be solved. So alhamdulillah, this is the way that Mus'ab worked. And by the time the year was finished, everybody knew about Islam. Everybody knew about Islam. But there were only 2 people who would come to the city from Mecca. Mus'ab ibn Umair and Abdullah ibn Maktoum. Who's Abdullah ibn Maktoum? Anybody know? What's he famous for? Yeah, you can Google it if you want, but you haven't got time. Just if you don't know, you just say I don't know. Right, he's famous for several things. One is that he's also a reciter of Quran. He's blind, and he has some special status. So there's only 2 people. Both of them are extremely poor, extremely downtrodden, but the one thing they have is their Quran. And the Quran is what was the principle of moving forward. Are you staying? So my niece has just come. So, right, I'm going to go back to the book. فلما عرض نفسه عفوا طيب وفي موسم من سنة الثالثة عشر. So now this is in the year of the 13th year after the revelation. It came to the Hajj period again. خرج حجاج الأنصار من المسلمين مع حجاج قومهم من المشركين فلما قدموا مكة واعلموا وعد رسول الله في الأقبة في أوسط ليالي التشريق. So when the people this time come from Medina, you can tell there's going to be a different kind of story. You've got Asad ibn Zuraqa's people, you've got Sa'd ibn Ubadah, you've got a whole lot of people who are now anticipating something special on this Hajj. So now what those people are planning, Quraysh, they're not going to, it's gone beyond their counter dawah, their spreading of lies and stuff. So they get there and they agree to meet the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam min awsat layali tashriq, in the middle night of the days of tashriq. So this is the Hajj period. Did you go for Hajj or Umrah? Umrah. So when you go for Hajj, you have the main days of the Hajj, Arafah and Minna, and then after that you have what we call Ayyam al-Tashriq, where basically you're allowed to relax. And during these days of relaxation, it's actually in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, Ayyam al-Tashriq, Ayyam al-Akl wa Shurb. These days are the days of eating and drinking. And that's why if you when you're on those days, enjoy what you've got to eat. And on the second of those 3 days, they met with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. باتوا مع قومهم. So he then made an oath of allegiance with them. فلما مضى ثلث الليل خرجوا مستخفين فلما اجتمعوا بالشعب عند أقبة. So those people that know the Hajj, the Aqaba is where you have the Bara Shaitan. Is that right? The big Shaitan, Le Grand Diable. You have it written in all the languages. So the Bara Shaitan, but its real name is Aqaba. Aqaba is the place where the Grand Shaitan, the big Shaitan is. So you have 3 Shaitans, and the big Shaitan is the one that's nearest to Mecca. And if you go there, you should still see, it was still there last year, but one day they're going to knock it down. There's a little orange mosque. There's a little orange mosque, still there. There's a little orange mosque, and now there's nothing anywhere nearby. There's just like a big fence and this old orange mosque in the middle. That mosque is where this took place. There was a tree there, and they gathered under the tree and they made this oath of allegiance to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. جاءوا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ومعه العباس. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to the appointed time in the middle of the night, where nobody was watching, and he came with his uncle Abbas. What did I just say about Abbas's position? Does this not prove my point that I'm trying to... Anyway, خلاص, I'm not trying to prove points. Leave that. وهو يومئذ باق على دينه لكن أراد أن يتوثق لابن أخيه. So he says, according to the hadith, it says he was following his religion. Anyway, Allah knows best what that means. فكلم الرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He says, أبايعكم على أن تمنعوني مما تمنعون منه أنفسكم. I ask you to pledge that you will protect me from everything that you would protect yourselves from. وَنِسَاءَكُمْ, and you would protect your women from. وَأَبْنَاءَكُمْ, and your children. Will you do this? قَالُوا نَعَمْ, and they said yes. فقال لهم أخرجوا إلي منكم 12 نقيبا كفلاء على قومهم. So send from amongst you 12 people who will represent your different tribes. So you can see here now, this is a stage further than the first Aqaba. Now he now wants an allegiance, he wants a pact, he wants people to be represented. He's almost setting a political agenda here. وهم 9 من الخزرج, and they were 9 from the Khazraj. And then he lists Asad ibn Zuraqa, who we've already mentioned. ورافع ابن مالك ابن عجلان وسعد بن ربيع وسعد بن عبادة وعبادة بن صامت وعبد الله بن رواحة وعبد الله بن عمر بن حرم والد جابر والمنذر بن عمر والثلاثة من أوس and 3 from Aus أسيد بن حضير والرفاع بن المنذر وسعد بن خيثمة رضي الله عنهم. And then he says فقال لهم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن أنتم كفلاء على قومكم ككفالة الحواريين لعيسى ابن مريم. Then he says to these 12, he says, you 12 are to your people and to me like the apostles were to the disciples were to Isa. وأنا كفيل على قومي, and I will be responsible for the people. Will I be responsible for the people? قالوا نعم, you will be in charge. قالوا نعم فبايعوا ووعدوهم على الوفاء الجنة وجملتهم 73 رجلا وامرأتان. And then he then promised them the garden. Then he promised them that, because bay'ah actually means a trade. Bay'ah actually means to do a deal. So what did they give to him? They says, we'll give you everything. And what did he give them in exchange? The Jannah. And it's interesting, there's several verses related to this, and one of the probably the most powerful verse related to this story is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُمْ بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. That Allah has bought from the believers themselves and their wealth بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ, and in exchange they will receive the garden. It's appropriate that Mus'ab ibn Umair was the one that had spent the year with them. So of course, once this has happened, وروى أن جبريل عليه السلام كان إلى جنب النبي عند مبايعتهم وهو يشير إليهم واحدا بعد واحد. And it's related in a hadith, and this is the hadith it's referring to is found in Al-Bayhaqi, Dala'il al-Nabuwah, that Sayyidina Jibreel was there and he pointed out Usayd ibn Zaraqa, Sa'ad ibn Ubadah, and he pointed and he told the Prophet ﷺ the names of each one. And that was Sayyidina Jibreel's responsibility. وَلَمَّا تَمَّتِ الْبَيْعَةِ صَاحَ إِبْلِيسِ. And when the bay'ah was completed, Iblis screamed. Shaitan screamed. لعنه الله. صيحة المنكرة مشبهة صوت بصوت منبأ من الحجاج السهمي. And the voice was the voice and the sound of Munabbi' ibn Hujjaj al-Sahmi. And he shouted with that, so everybody thought it was Munabbi' ibn. يا أهل منى هذا محمد وأهل يثرب قد اجتمعوا لحربكم. So so then the people woke. فقال له رسول الله أي عدو الله, O enemy of Allah, أما والله لأفرغن لك. Don't worry, I will be free to deal with you. ثم تفرقوا. And then they all went their separate ways. Now that story, that incident, has now set up the rest of the seerah. Because now the seerah is about those people who stood by the Prophet ﷺ and said, you are our leader and we will protect you from everybody. Because up until that point, who was I talking about? I was talking about people like Mus'ab ibn Umair. I was talking about Ammar ibn Yasir. I was talking about Bilal ibn Rabah. These were all people that had nothing to offer the Prophet ﷺ. Even Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. What did he offer the Prophet ﷺ? He offered him every physical help that he had. However, at no point did he ever stand up and fight, because he wasn't allowed to. And when the one person stood up and fought, like Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, the Prophet ﷺ says you were not allowed to. Now the agenda has changed completely. And that scream from Iblis will be heard over and over again. Inshallah, the next time, maybe I should just jump to the next story, because I can see when I mention Iblis, people got excited. Yeah, let me jump to Iblis. No, leave that. There'll be time for it, please. The Prophet ﷺ then responds, goes back to the people, to his... he comes back to his people, meaning the people of Makkah. And he says to them, ثم إن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لأصحابه إن الله قد جعل لكم إخوانا ودارا تأمنون بها. Allah has given you brothers. He comes to the people of Makkah and he says, Allah has given you brothers and He's given you a house, a homeland, which is safe for you. وأمرهم بالهجرة. And then He commanded them to leave. فهاجروا إليها. فلقوا عند الأنصار خير دار وخير جوار آثروهم على أنفسهم وقاسمهم في أموالهم. When he told them that you're now going to people who, you're going to the best homeland, to the best of people, and they will provide for you by dividing what they have. And then Allah sent down the verse, يحبون من هاجر إليهم. Allah loves those people that migrated to them. وَلَا يَجِدُونَ فِي صُدُورِهِمْ حَاجَةً. And they had no, in their hearts, any desire. مِمَّا أُوتُوا وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. And these people had no feeling of this dunya. And they preferred the others over themselves, even if it caused them difficulty. So this praises both the Muhajirin and the Ansar. And yesterday I mentioned a hadith that this Islam began amongst strangers. بدأ الدين غريبا فسيعود كما بدأ غريبا. And this was talking about the people of Mecca. Now there's two parts to the Ummah, and this is what the Prophet now says: لولا الهجرة لكنت أمرا من الأنصار ولو سلك الناس واديا سلكت الأنصار شئبا لسلكت وادي الأنصار وشئبهم. He says that this, because of this hijrah, meaning the state of the Ansar, if these people, the Ansar, took one path and went into one valley, and everybody else took another path and another valley, I would go with the Ansar. And he said, أوصيكم بالأنصار خيرا. I'm giving you advice to treat them well. فإنهم كرشي وأبتي قد فضوا الذين عليهم وبقي الذي لهم فأقبلوا من محسنهم وتجاوز عن مسيئهم. He says, these are my in effect, these are my people. These are my whoever holds fast to them, they should فأقبلوا من محسنهم, accept whatever's good from them, and anything that you ever hear of negative, overlook it. Alhamdulillah, فأقام بمكة ينتظر الإذن. So then he waited in Mecca, waiting for permission to leave. So after this, then he started to send people in small groups. And everybody went in small groups except Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab. He went in a big group, very publicly. He took 30 people with him, and he loaded up the camels himself, and he says, we are now going to Al-Madinah, or we're now going to Yathrib. And of course nobody could stop him. But everybody else went secretly. I'm only going to tell one story because it's actually one of the stories that's in here, and it's a very beautiful story. I'm sure it's in here. Story of Abu Salama. Can't find it anyway, I'll just tell it. But it's in here, I promise you. Right, So how many people from Quraysh have gone to Makkah, to Medina at this point? Sorry? No, from Makkah to Medina. Of the people, Meccan people, Muhajirin. And what were their names? Mus'ab ibn Umair and Abdullah ibn Maktoum. There's only two. These are the first two to go, and the third one was a man called Abu Salama. Now Abu Salama had made his hijrah to Abyssinia. He'd come back. He'd faced particular difficulties. Why? Because he and his wife, he was from Bani Mughira, which is a bit more closely associated to the Prophet's family, and his wife Salama was from Bani Makhzum, who is the tribe of Abu Jahl. So she's from the strongest enemies of the Prophet ﷺ, but she's Muslim. So they suffered a lot. So they were the first people to be given permission to leave. So they were allowed to leave, and of course they left in the middle of the night. They left in the middle of the night, and when they set out, it was just the three of them. Abu Salama, the father of Salama, Salama, the mother of Salama, and guess who else the third was? Salama, who was just a small boy. So they get out there, and on the way, the news gets out that Abu Salama and his family are escaping to Medina. So at this point, their families become crazy, and they go out and they stop them. And they gang up and they threaten Abu Salama. He says, go, but you can't take her with you. She's ours. She belongs to us. She belongs to us. And he's got no choice now. So he leaves her. But to make it worse, when she comes back, Bani Abdul Mughira's, Abu Salama's family hear what had happened. So they go and they take the child, say, you can keep your woman, but you're not keeping our child. So they steal the child they take the child, it's our custody. So now the three of them are split. And Salama every single day would go to the place where they split and cry. So she'd go there in the morning, she'd just sit there all day and just cry, hoping that Allah will send a miracle. Because that's the last thing she can remember, is the point at which her life was destroyed. It happened there. It happened on that spot. So she went there every day, until one day somebody had took pity on them. Abdullah bin Talha. I'll come to the name. So he comes and says, I will sort this out. And he gets the son, goes to the family, explains this is wrong. The least thing you should do is bring the child and the mother together. So the families agree. She goes out to that spot. He meets her there, and he takes her to Quba, which is where Abu Salama is. And he takes her there, and he says to her, you're now safe, enter into Quba. And alhamdulillah, they settle there. Taib. So alhamdulillah, the migration starts, and I'm now going to jump to the story of Shaitan. Okay. If I can find it. I can't find that. I should have read the book and made notes, shouldn't I? I'll just tell you the story. Meanwhile, the people of Mecca, the Quraysh, now can see what's happening. They can now see what's happening. So they decide they have to put a stop to this, because if the Prophet ﷺ leaves and he goes to Medina, to Yathrib, and he sets up with the support of Aus and Khazraj, who interestingly have fought, they're used to fighting each other. If they get together and decide to fight us, this could be really problematic. So we need to make sure he doesn't get to Yathrib by whatever means necessary. So they gather together some of their young men and they make a plan. And there is one person who appears as an old man from the Najd, from the mountains. And he looks like he's from Banu Hanifa. And he appears and he says, I've come to help you to devise a plan. I said, good. Any help is good. And they start to plot. What we will do is we will kill him before he can leave. And if we kill him before he leaves, then they can have their army. It's not going to be a problem, because without Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so they plot to kill him. And all of the leaders get together in this place of Bani Nadwa, and they appoint the young punks from the community. They get together 4 or 5 young people, and they say, all of these young people, because if you get young punks to do it, then it's not so serious. If it's just kids in the street, it's a tactic. Then it's not, there'll be no blood on our hands, and we won't be seen to have murdered one of our people. They've plotted to murder him before, remember? Ammar ibn Yasir, when Ammar ibn Walid, they says, give us Muhammad and we'll give you Walid. Ammar. So they've had their plots and plans, but this time they've decided they're going to kill, and it's going to be clear. This is the way. So this Najdi Sheikh, old man from the Najd, who is really Iblis, is the one who's giving them the story. The best way to do it is get the young people get them to carry the knife, hide the knife afterwards. So they make the plot. And they decide that they're going to kill him on a particular night, in a particular place, which is where they always know that he prays. So they go ahead. Of course, going back to that story in Aqaba, who was with the Prophet ﷺ? Jibril and the good guys. So here Jibril comes and he informs the Prophet ﷺ, he has instructed you to go. And Iblis has plotted to kill you. So prepare tonight. And he goes to his best friend, who is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, who is in the house of his child bride, Sayyidatuna Aisha, who of course is married to him, betrothed in a contract, but doesn't live with him. And this girl is only 7 years old, 7 or 8 years old at this time. And she describes that day. She says, I saw the Prophet ﷺ come into my house, and I looked at my father, and he asked, do you have news? And the Prophet ﷺ smiled at him and he says, indeed I have news. He says, have you been given permission? He says, indeed I have been given permission to leave. And then Abu Bakr says, and are you leaving with me? And she says, I never saw my father happier than that moment. And he says, I never knew that people could cry when they're happy. Because until that time she thought tears were to do with sadness. And she says that her father began to cry so profusely that he knew that he was the one that was chosen to accompany the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on his hijrah to Al-Madinah. And inshallah after lunch we'll continue that story inshallah.